I sat on the worn-out sofa in my tiny flat in Bishop Stortford, staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper opposite me. The funeral had just ended and I was back home, yet everything felt heavier than the quiet room around me. Tom had come with me, Tom, my soon-to-be ex-husband, because apparently, even on the brink of our divorce, he wanted to play the part of a real man. The kind of man who sticks around during dark times. But I wasn't fooled. Behind his polite exterior, he was just performing for the spectators. With me he had no shame left. And now more than ever, I regretted that he had insisted on coming. Marina, you're now a wealthy woman, Tom had sneered earlier, the same voice dripping with mockery. A proper heiress. Your Gran left you quite the legacy. I said nothing, just looked at him. Gran had never liked Tom. She never hid it either. She made it clear from the start, with that sharp tongue of hers that could cut glass. Tom did everything to avoid her, then begged me not to visit, and eventually forbade it. How many fights had we had over Gran? Too many to count. I tried to visit whenever Tom was away, but somehow he always found out. The arguments would flare up like wildfire, and he'd say things so cruel that anyone else would have fled long ago. But I stayed. I endured, clinging to the hope that things could be fixed. Spoiler alert. They didn't get fixed. Tom filed for divorce and I kept hoping stupidly. Then the call came. Gran had passed away. The last truly loving person in my life. The only one I almost traded for a man like Tom. I remember the cold punch of that news sinking in. The loneliness wrapping around me like a shroud. Tom, ever the cynic, joked about Gran's humor. She'd sold the house and everything in it, he said, leaving me with nothing but an old, broken fridge that hadn't worked for a century. What a treasure, he mocked. But I felt a flicker of something stronger than sadness, hatred. Hatred so deep it hurt inside my chest. I stood up, feeling all my hopes crumble. Not because Tom had changed, but because I had. My feelings for him had turned bitter, like the burnt toast I'd make if I ever tried to cook breakfast. He trailed after me as I packed my bags, offering money to move the precious heirlooms with security guards and all. I silently packed, numb. Put it in the bedroom, he said with a sly grin. Keep your most valuable possession close. I looked at him and asked myself, really asked if he had ever loved me. His laughter was cold and sharp, slicing through my fragile heart. Love? That's for fools like you. People who think they're worth something. You'll be picking through rubbish heaps in no time. His words hit me harder than I expected. I left the flat that day, dragging my bags through the quiet streets to my parents' old house. They died in a car crash when I was 6, and Gran had raised me since. People in town whispered about Gran, called her harsh, sharp-tongued and stingy, but she was my rock. She loved me fiercely, helped with schoolwork, and comforted me when my heart first broke in year 5. She took me seriously, never belittled me. I regretted not visiting her more lately, trying to avoid pointless family fights. Suddenly, a small voice interrupted my thoughts. A scruffy boy about 10 years old appeared next to me, startling me. He looked homeless, his clothes grimy and worn. I hadn't even heard him approach, but he smiled slyly and said he needed to stay unnoticed if he wanted to avoid going hungry. Can I help you with those bags? He asked, eyes bright despite his rough appearance. I hesitated, then nodded. Tears pricked my eyes. I hadn't realized I was crying. I didn't want to admit it, but I was lost. He lifted the heaviest bag with ease and asked if I'd been here long. About 5 years, I replied. He whistled. You've got a home but don't visit? Weird. I laughed despite myself. I wasn't homeless, just complicated. He introduced himself as Sam and seemed sharp and quick-witted despite his ragged looks. Inside the flat, he opened doors, inspected corners, and declared it a week's worth of cleaning to make it livable again. I smiled at his energy and promised we'd tackle what we could today. I even offered him the spare sofa to crash on, which surprised him. So I don't have to go back to the streets tonight? He asked, hopeful. Of course not, I said, feeling a warmth I hadn't in months. That evening after dinner, Sam shared his story. His parents had been addicts and their house burned down. He'd escaped the system and refused to go into care. Everyone says kids from care never turn out right, he told me, eyes wide with determination. But I want to be normal. I stroked his tangled hair and told him that normal was whatever he wanted it to be, and no care home could stop that. That night I tucked him in, telling him I'd be out for a few hours to finalize the divorce paperwork. When I returned, the flat felt emptier but somehow more alive with Sam there. The fridge, that old relic from Gran's house, became a strange focal point of our days. Sam was fascinated by it, poking and prodding, wondering if it could ever be fixed. One evening, after a day of cleaning and laughter, Sam noticed something odd about the fridge's panels. With a bit of cautious prying, we discovered hidden compartments stuffed with bundles of cash and some small boxes. I pressed him close, overwhelmed. This was the real legacy Gran had left me. A fortune hidden in plain sight. I whispered to Sam that with this, maybe we could find a proper home for him, and perhaps even give him the future he dreamed of. He looked at me, eyes shining with hope, asking if I really meant it. I did. More than anything, years later, watching Sam graduate with honors as a finance major, not a train driver as he'd once dreamed, I felt pride swell inside me. He had blossomed into the man Gran must have hoped for. At the celebratory party, I spotted Tom across the room, still the same sneering stranger. Sam introduced him as the ex-husband I'd divorced years ago, a man best left in the past. Tom tried to charm the crowd, but Sam's candid story of homelessness and resilience silenced the room. He made it clear he wouldn't work with such a man, and neither would anyone else. The local papers had a field day, branding Tom a ruthless businessman no one wanted to touch. For me, that chapter was closed. I had found new family, new hope, and a future I never imagined. But as I looked into Sam's eyes that evening, a flicker of unease stirred. A shadow of a secret still lingering beneath the surface of Gran's legacy, waiting to be uncovered. The days that followed felt like waking from a long, suffocating dream into a world painted with sharper colors and bolder sounds. Sam and I settled into a rhythm in the old flat, which, despite its peeling paint and creaky floorboards, now hummed with possibility. The money hidden in Gran's fridge was enough to patch up the place and even look at renting something better, a real home for the first time in years. But while the renovations began, I kept finding myself drawn back to that mysterious fridge, as if it held more secrets than just forgotten cash. One afternoon, I was sorting through some of Gran's old belongings, a dusty box of letters, black and white photos, and faded newspaper clippings, when I stumbled on a curious note tucked inside an envelope. The handwriting was unmistakably Gran's, looping, firm, with a touch of elegance. It mentioned a man named Leonard, someone Gran had trusted decades ago, and hinted at a debt owed, a promise unfulfilled. The note ended with a warning. Beware those who smile too well. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Gran had been secretive about her past, but this was the first real clue that there was more to her story than I'd ever known. That evening, I sat with Sam in the small, newly painted kitchen. The light from the single bulb cast long shadows on the walls, and the smell of fresh paint mingled with the faint scent of old wood. Sam, now looking more confident in his smart shirt and jeans, caught my gaze and smiled. His journey had been hard, but seeing him here, safe and hopeful, made my own struggles feel lighter. Yet, even as I smiled back, a part of me was restless. Haunted by Gran's cryptic message, I found myself thinking about Leonard. Who was he? And why did Gran warn me? My mind raced through the possibilities, half expecting Tom's sneering face to pop up in the shadows, but it was someone else, someone I didn't know yet. I decided to look into it to uncover the truth Gran had buried. The next morning, armed with a notebook and a sense of determination, I headed to the local library. The librarian, a kindly woman named Mrs. Jenkins, helped me dig through old records and archives. Leonard's name popped up several times, once in connection with a small manufacturing firm in Hertfordshire, another time tied to some land disputes in a nearby village. The trail was faint but real. As I pieced together the fragments, I realized that Gran's life had been far more complicated than a quiet old lady's. She'd been involved in business, debts, perhaps even danger. The thought made me both nervous and exhilarated. Maybe this inheritance was more than just money and an old fridge. It was a key to a hidden part of my family's history. Returning home, I found Sam waiting with a cup of tea and a grin. "You look like you've just uncovered a conspiracy," he teased. I laughed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the edge of something big. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, the shadows of the room growing longer, my thoughts swirling. The old fridge sat silently in the corner, its cold metal surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I reached out, running my fingers over the worn handles, and wondered what other secrets it might hide. The next morning, The postman delivered a plain envelope addressed to me. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and black and white, showing Gran standing beside a tall, stern-looking man with sharp eyes and a faint smile. The back of the photo was scrawled with the words, "Trust no one. Especially not Leonard." My heart pounded. The warning was real. Someone was watching, someone from Gran's past who didn't want me digging around. For the first time in a long while, fear crept in alongside my determination. But I wasn't about to back down. Gran had faced whatever this was, and so would I. I looked at Sam, who was quietly reading at the kitchen table, and silently vowed to protect him, to unravel this mystery not just for myself, but for the family I was building with him. Whatever lay ahead, we'd face it together. Yet, as I locked the front door behind me that morning, a shadow detached itself from the crowd on the street. A man in a dark coat watched with unreadable eyes, a smile twitching at the corner of his mouth. Leonard, perhaps? Or someone far worse. And in that moment I knew my life was about to change forever. The days blurred together in a strange mix of hope and unease. The flat was slowly transforming, from a dusty shell into a place that finally felt like home. Fresh curtains hung in the windows, the walls were brightened with soft cream paint. And the floors, well, the floors still creaked in protest, but that was part of the charm. Sam was thriving, diving into his studies with a focus that made me proud. His once ragged clothes replaced by neat shirts and well-fitted trousers. Watching him grow was like witnessing a flower stubbornly blooming through cracks in the pavement. But beneath the surface of this newfound calm, my mind was restless. Gran's warnings echoed in my thoughts, gnawing at me with every quiet moment. Who was Leonard? Why had Gran trusted him once, only to caution me against him now? The photograph sent chills down my spine every time I glanced at it on the mantelpiece. A stark reminder that shadows from the past were closing in. One afternoon, I found myself wandering the narrow lanes of a nearby market town, Hertford, notebook in hand. The streets were charming, lined with quaint shops and the scent of freshly baked bread drifting from the bakery on the corner. I'd learned that Leonard's name had been tied to a manufacturing company there decades ago. Digging through old business directories at the town hall, I uncovered a name. Leonard Hargreaves, a man with a reputation for charm and ruthlessness in equal measure. The more I read, the more the pieces started to form a picture. Leonard wasn't just a businessman. He was someone who played dirty, who didn't hesitate to cross lines. Gran had clearly been involved with him, and whatever promises or debts had been made, they had left scars. Walking back to the car, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. Every glance over my shoulder was met with empty streets or curious shopkeepers, but the prickling sensation remained. I shook it off. Paranoia was a dangerous game, especially when you had a teenager to inspire and a life to rebuild. Back home, Sam was waiting with a smile that made my heart ache with affection. He held out a battered old book he'd found in the library, something about the history of Hertfordshire families. "Look what I found," he said, eyes bright. "Maybe it can help with your mystery, man." We spent the evening poring over the dusty pages, piecing together tidbits about Leonard's family, rumors of hidden wealth, whispered scandals, and a long history of broken alliances. Yet, among the gossip, one thing was clear. Leonard Hargreaves was not a man to cross. That night, I dressed carefully for a charity event in town, a chance to meet people who might help me navigate the tangled web of Gran's past. I chose a deep emerald green dress that hugged my curves just enough to feel confident without shouting for attention. Paired with elegant black heels and a delicate silver necklace that had belonged to Gran, I hoped to blend into the crowd while still carrying a hint of the woman I was becoming. Arriving at the event, the grand hall buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. I felt a familiar flutter of nerves but reminded myself that this was a step forward. As I mingled, I caught sight of a man standing near the buffet. A tall figure in a dark suit, his eyes sharp and calculating. My breath caught. Could it be Leonard? The man's gaze briefly met mine before he turned away. Disappearing into the crowd like a shadow, I shook my head, scolding myself for letting fear take hold. But deep down I knew this was no coincidence. Leonard, or whoever he was here watching, waiting, returning home. The quiet of the flat felt heavier. Sam was asleep on the sofa, a book resting on his chest. I looked at the fridge, still humming quietly in the corner, and the hidden compartments that had changed everything. That old relic was more than a piece of furniture. It was a vault of secrets, a bridge to a past I was only beginning to understand. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was simple. Stop digging or you'll regret it. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. The warning was clear. But giving up wasn't an option. I locked the door twice and checked the windows before finally crawling under the covers. Sleep was elusive, but exhaustion claimed me eventually. In the quiet darkness, I promised myself I would protect Sam, uncover the truth, and face whatever came next. Because some legacies were worth fighting for. Even when the shadows threatened to swallow everything. The morning light crept through the thin curtains, casting pale stripes across the rumpled sheets where I'd finally surrendered to restless sleep. The message from the night before lingered in my mind like a dark cloud, but I shoved the fear aside. Threats were meant to scare, and I wasn't about to be intimidated. Not now. Not after everything Gran had endured. I dressed carefully in a soft blouse and a pencil skirt that skimmed my hips just right, paired with modest black heels that clicked softly on the wooden floor. I wanted to feel strong today, like a woman who could navigate whatever storm was brewing. I ran a hand through my chestnut hair, then glanced at the mirror, catching a glimpse of the woman staring back. Determined, fragile, defiant. Sam was already up, sitting at the kitchen table, his focus on a pile of textbooks. I poured us both some tea, the steam curling up like a comforting whisper in the quiet flat. He looked up, offering a tired smile that warmed my heart. I'm going to visit some old friends Gran mentioned, I told him. People she trusted. Maybe they can shed some light on this, Leonard. Sam nodded, eyes serious. Be careful, Mum. I gave him a quick hug, knowing I'd need all the strength I could muster. Outside, the town was waking up, the streets filling with the usual mix of dog walkers, early commuters, and the odd jogger who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else but out of bed. I took a deep breath and set off toward a small, tucked-away cafe that Gran had often visited, a place where time seemed to slow down, and secrets were whispered over steaming cups of coffee. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted beans and freshly baked pastries. The walls were lined with faded photographs of the town's history, and the worn wooden tables bore the marks of countless conversations. I spotted Mrs. Whitaker, a sprightly woman with silver hair and bright eyes, sitting alone by the window. Gran had spoken of her as a dear friend, someone who'd known the family for years. Approaching cautiously, I introduced myself, watching as recognition flickered in her eyes. She smiled warmly but with a hint of sadness, as if carrying a weight she'd rather share than bear alone. Over the course of the afternoon, Mrs. Whitaker painted a picture of Gran's past far richer and more complicated than I'd imagined. Leonard Hargreaves wasn't just a business associate. He was a man who'd once been deeply involved in Gran's life, perhaps too deeply. There were hints of betrayal, of promises broken, and a shadowy dispute that had forced Gran to make difficult choices. Your Gran was a strong woman, Mrs. Whitaker said, her voice soft but resolute. She protected you even from herself. Leonard was dangerous and she knew it. That fridge of hers? It held more than money. It was a safeguard, a way to keep what mattered hidden. Her words sent a chill down my spine. What else could Gran have hidden away? And why had she entrusted it to me, knowing the risks? Leaving the cafe, I felt a mix of gratitude and unease. Mrs. Whitaker's insights were invaluable, but they only deepened the mystery. Whoever Leonard was, he wasn't finished with us. That evening, back at the flat, Sam and I settled into a quiet dinner. The soft glow of the table lamp cast flickering shadows, and for a moment the outside world seemed to fade away. But as I cleared the plates, my phone buzzed again. A new message lighting up the screen. Last warning that I swallowed hard, the weight of the threat pressing down like a heavy fog. But beneath the fear, a spark of defiance burned brighter than ever. Gran's legacy wasn't just money or secrets, it was courage. And I was determined to live up to it. As the night deepened, I found myself standing by the window, gazing out at the darkened street. Somewhere out there, the man watching me before was still lurking, waiting, planning. But I wasn't alone anymore. With Sam by my side and the truth slowly unfolding, I felt ready to face whatever shadows came next. Because some battles are worth fighting, even when the cost is high. And some legacies demand nothing less than everything. The following days unfolded like a tangled web, each thread pulling me deeper into a world I never expected to enter. Between juggling Sam's schoolwork and managing the slow renovations to the flat, I found myself chasing leads, piecing together fragments of Gran's life that seemed to shimmer just out of reach. Each new discovery brought a mix of hope and dread, a strange cocktail that settled heavy in my chest. On a chilly morning, I made my way to Hertford again, this time to visit an old solicitor's office Gran had once used. The building was a weathered brick structure squeezed between a bakery and a florist, its faded sign barely hanging on. Inside, the scent of leather-bound books and polished wood greeted me, and the receptionist directed me to a man named Mr. Clark, who had known Gran well. Mr. Clark was a tall, lean gentleman with steel-gray hair and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. He welcomed me with a cautious smile, as if weighing the burden I carried. Over cups of black coffee, he told me that Gran had been involved in a complicated property dispute years ago, one that Leonard Hargreaves had tried to manipulate for his own gain. She was clever, Mr. Clark said, leaning forward. More than most gave her credit for. But Leonard, he was ruthless. Gran made sure to protect herself and you. That fridge, for example, it wasn't just a hiding place for money but a barrier against people like him. His words echoed what Mrs. Whitaker had said, but hearing it from someone so official made it all feel more real. I thanked him and left with a folder of old documents, contracts, letters, and some faded photographs. One in particular caught my eye. Gran standing beside Leonard, but her expression was guarded, almost defiant, while Leonard's smile seemed to mask something darker. Back in the flat, as Sam and I spread the papers on the dining table, I felt the weight of history pressing down on us. Sam flicked through the documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. This is serious stuff, he murmured. No wonder Gran was so protective. I nodded, my fingers trembling slightly. It's more than just money. It's about safety, trust, and maybe revenge. That night's sleep felt elusive again. The shadows in the room seemed to lengthen, and I found myself staring at the fridge, wondering if there was still more hidden inside. I ran my hand over its cold surface, feeling the faint hum of the old motor beneath my fingertips. This relic was a silent guardian of secrets, and I was beginning to understand its true purpose. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. A courier arrived with a small, unmarked package addressed to me. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was unmistakably Gran's, careful, elegant script that told stories of love, loss, and betrayal. As I read, a portrait of Gran emerged, not just as the sharp-tongued woman I'd known, but as someone who had fought fiercely to protect her family from shadows that stretched far beyond our quiet town. One passage caught my eye. A warning about Leonard, describing him as a man who wears a mask of charm but hides a heart of ice. Gran's words were filled with both fear and fierce determination, a testament to the battles she'd faced alone. Sam listened quietly as I read aloud, his eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and concern. We have to be careful, he said after a pause. If Leonard's still out there, he won't stop. I agreed. But fear was no longer my master. With every page, every clue, I felt myself growing stronger, more resolute. Gran's legacy was no longer just a hidden fortune. It was a call to action. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the flat was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, I stood by the window once more. The street outside was calm, but I knew better. Somewhere beyond that quiet, a storm was gathering, and I was ready to face it head-on. Because sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, and sometimes the only way forward is through the fire.